Morning, morning, morning. Good morning. Good morning to you.
As we do on Tuesday mornings, we get started with Barbados Ambassador to CARICOM, His Excellency David Comissiong. Good morning to you and welcome.
Morning, Tisha. Thank you very much.
I'm intrigued to hear you say, come long home. I love the theme. It says a great deal about what we can look forward to in 2025 for We Gathering.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it, and I'm hoping and maybe expecting that sometime during that year of We Gathering, we are going to make those legislative amendments that would permit the grandchildren and maybe even the great-grandchildren of Barbadians born abroad to have citizenship of Barbados.
All right. Well, that theme reminds me of, being little and somebody finds you outside where you're not supposed to be and they say, come long home. So it really is a call to action.
And come long home in many ways, and that's what I'm saying, including citizenship.
Yes.
Come long home, re-establish that connection with the homeland.
All right. So exactly 1 week ago, the U.S. had their presidential election. A very interesting race that turned out in the Republicans' favor. So this morning, I know that you want to take a look at the implications of the impending Trump presidency for CARICOM. So first of all, what are some of the implications that you see from the outset as we look at this presidency? I know that for a lot of people, a real talking point was people felt as though there would be mass deportation.
Yes, well, candidate Trump, his number one pledge is mass deportations. He made immigration or migration into the U.S. his number one issue, and he has made a pledge that on day one of his presidency, he will launch a campaign of mass deportations of illegal immigrants in the United States. So this will have serious implications for CARICOM because you will find that there are quite a number of CARICOM citizens who are in the United States as quote-unquote illegal migrants. We know that during the campaign, a great focus was put on Haitians in the United States, Haitian migrants. And even though, even Haitians who had a type of status that permitted them to be in the United States, they were still being designated as illegal migrants. And so CARICOM countries, we really need to brace for this. The thing about the United States is that it is part of our neighborhood, but it's the biggest and most powerful country in our neighborhood, and our neighborhood of the Americas. And so whatever it does, it is going to have consequences for us, whether positive or negative. And definitely, if Mr. Trump follows through on his promise to institute mass deportations, all CARICOM countries are going to be implicated. So Haiti, for example, that is struggling with such a crisis, the instability within Haiti, the failed economy. Haiti is already reeling from the Dominican Republic carrying out mass deportations of Haitians back to across the border to Haiti. How is Haiti going to cope? So this is something that we have to think about, and we have to prepare ourselves. We need to have some kind of action plan. If this happens, how will we absorb people being sent back? And for example, we should be thinking about speaking to the International Organization for Migration, the international body that deals with helping countries that have to deal with incoming migration. And so these are the types of things that CARICOM, we need as a collective to start considering now and making plans.
And considering chat about CARICOM as a collective, a big talking point throughout the U.S. election was about the application of tariffs to imports into the U.S. Is there any legislation or any treaties? Are there any treaties in place to be able to protect the Caribbean goods that now go into the U.S.? Or do you believe the Caribbean could possibly be subjected to some of these tariffs that we've heard about?
Yes, well, another big promise that Mr. Trump made in his campaign was that the United States was being taken advantage of by countries sending imports into the U.S. market, and that he was going to impose a tariff. At some points he said 10%, at other points he said 20%. At some points he directed it at China, Chinese products. At other points he spoke about it as if it would be across the board. So again, this is something that has to concern us, because the United States is our biggest, CARICOM's biggest trading partner. And we have something called the Caribbean Basin Initiative, which is a program of the Ronald Reagan presidency. Back in the early 80s, Mr. Reagan established this Caribbean Basin Initiative, under which our countries have a number of the things that we produce here have duty-free access to the U.S. market. And so the question would be, will a Trump presidency be hostile to the continuance of that program, that Caribbean Basin Initiative? Fortunately, the Caribbean Basin Initiative, or CBI, is anchored in legislation. The Caribbean Basin Economic Recovery Act, the Caribbean Basin Partnership and Trade Act, and is in place legislatively until the year 2030. But, you know, the Republicans are going to control both the House of Congress and the Senate, and therefore will be in a position to pass legislation. So this is something that will concern us. Hopefully, the CBI will not be touched, and we will not have to worry about that. But we have to be concerned, because even the threat to impose tariffs, even if only on imports from China, is going to have implications for us, because we source a lot of our imports from the United States. And if tariffs are imposed, it means that the price of those goods will increase. So it will mean a rise in the cost of living for us. And, you know, Mr. Trump was saying he's going to impose these tariffs and that the Chinese will have to pay. Well, it doesn't really work like that. If you impose tariffs, your people who are purchasing these goods, they're the ones who will pay the higher prices, you know? So the higher prices, when you impose tariffs, the higher prices are really passed on to the consumers who purchase the goods. And we are indirect consumers, because we purchase a lot of stuff Chinese made, but we purchase it out of the United States, you see? So again, we wait with bated breath to see to what extent that campaign pledge to impose these high tariffs is carried out.
There's been also much talk all around the region about the proliferation of illegal firearms here in the Caribbean. And many argue, obviously, you know, they're not made here in the region. So many point to the flow from the U.S., North America, maybe even south here into the Caribbean. How do you think gun rights? We know that the NRA has strong lobbyists who are even members of the Republican Party, and we see, you know, much commiseration, if you can call it that, with them, even in the face of mass shootings and stuff like that in the U.S. They've pledged that they believe that there's a right for guns. How will the application of certain gun rights and the way that's treated in the U.S. impact us here in the Caribbean, to
Well,
your mind?
as we know, all of the Caribbean countries are reeling from an increase in gun violence, crime linked to illegal firearms, and you're quite right. We don't manufacture these firearms. They're coming from, they're manufactured in the United States and find their way into our countries. And in recent times, CARICOM has been engaging with the U.S. authorities, with the Biden administration, saying to them, look, it is your gun manufacturers, it is your supply of firearms that is at the core of this very serious problem that is rocking our societies. For example, Mexico recently launched a legal case against the U.S. gun manufacturers, and several CARICOM countries joined the Mexican case. So we have been trying to get the cooperation of the Biden administration to help us to stem the flow of firearms into the Caribbean. Now, the Republicans have this commitment to free access to firearms, that every American citizen has the right to bear arms. And yes, lobby groups like the National Rifle Association are very hostile against any restrictions being placed on access to firearms. So this is something that we have to see how it pans out. But if you have an administration in office that has a philosophical commitment to access, freedom of access to firearms, it might have implications for the extent to which they're willing to admit that our crime problem is linked to that right of access to firearms in the United States, and their willingness to help us to solve the problem. So these, when there's a change in administration, because this country looms so large within the hemisphere of the Americas, its policies can have very sizable impacts on the rest of the region. So these are all things that we are going to have to take into consideration and prepare ourselves for.
So how might renewed U.S. policies under Trump affect CARICOM's climate goals, particularly concerning global commitments to climate change and climate justice, knowing what we know, that he really is a denier of climate change?
Well, I think that is perhaps the greatest area of concern for us. You have zeroed in on it. And I guess it should be the greatest area of concern. Number one, because it is such a life and death and existential issue for us, with the increasingly negative effects of global warming affecting us, the increasingly violent hurricanes, the droughts, the attack on our reefs and our coastlines, and so forth. And the fact that during the last Trump presidency, he pulled the United States out of the Paris Agreement. And so we have to wonder whether this new Trump presidency will do likewise again. But that has serious implications, because, the United States obviously plays a big role in global warming. It has contributed a lot to the problem, and it has a big role to play in helping to stop the global warming if we are to meet that target of 1.5 to stay alive. And this has the greatest implications for small island developing nations like Barbados. So we would be waiting with bated breath to see whether he once again pulls the U.S. out of the Paris Agreement and therefore does not contribute does not have the U.S. contribute to the fight against global warming. I mean, on the campaign trail, one of his slogans was "Drill, baby, drill." That he was going to be ignoring all of the proscriptions against the oil and gas industry, and that he did not believe in climate change. So this is very concerning, and so once again, it says to us that we have to be very proactive. If that is going to happen, it means that we are going to have to up the ante with our diplomacy in relation to other countries of the world, to hold this climate agenda together. And yes, it will have implications for, we were able to get the loss and damage fund set up. And we are hoping that big countries that have contributed to global warming, like the United States of America, will make the relevant contributions to the loss and damage fund, so that countries that did not cause the problem but suffer the consequences, we could get the compensation required, to respond, to adapt to the increase in the negative effects. So if the United States pulls out, it means that the rest of the world, we have to try to get the rest of the world to do even more, So again, we can only hope, we can only hope, but I think we have to prepare for the worst. And we have to start thinking, if this happens, what is the best response to it? But that's a big concern because of the previous history of President Trump pulling the United States out of the whole Paris Agreement that deals with the negative effects of climate change.
And there are very few issues, a real handful of issues, I'd say, that you usually hear the Democratic Party and the Republican Party seemingly singing from the same hymn sheet. One of the things that we saw throughout the Trump presidency, and I think carried on in smaller measure into the Biden administration, was the relationship with China. In terms of there not being any real cohesion, talk about, again, trade and imports and tariffs and all of that stuff. Do you think that a poor relationship with the U.S. and China can kind of get the Caribbean caught in the middle of it?
Well, yes, the U.S. administrations have sought to impose a Cold War logic on the Caribbean. In other words, they consider that they're in a competition with China. And you have found this attitude of saying to independent, sovereign Caribbean countries that you have to choose as well, And our attitude must be that we are not interested in any Cold War. We are not part of any Cold War. We are independent, sovereign nations, and we will have relations with any country in the world. As Prime Minister Errol Barrow said, friends of all, satellites of none. We will have relations based on our own assessment of what is in our best interests. So yes, there was some continuation between the Trump attitude towards China and the Republicans, and I guess President Trump has signaled that he is going to up that ante, the competition with China. But I think our policy in CARICOM must be to be the adults in the room and to say that this world is big enough for everybody. This world is big enough for you, USA, and for China. And we will not be placed in the position where we are forced to choose between one or the other. No, that's not what independence and sovereignty is all about. So I think it is clear what our continuing attitude should be in CARICOM, a very mature attitude. But A new Trump administration is going to pose problems in relation to Cuba, perhaps in relation to Venezuela. Cuba in particular, Cuba is very concerning because the last Trump presidency, in the dying days of that presidency, they put Cuba on the U.S. State Department's list of state sponsors of terrorism, which we all know is just a ridiculous charge. Cuba has never been involved in sponsoring terrorism. But it was done because by putting Cuba on that list, it brought enormous pressure on Cuba, pressure that has resulted in Cuba not being able to carry out international transactions, not having access to many, many critical imports that it needs. And so we have to be concerned about that because, you know, one of the anchors of CARICOM's foreign policy is solidarity with Cuba and is opposition to that U.S. blockade that has been imposed on Cuba now since 1962. And so the attitude of the last Trump presidency was very, very hostile towards Cuba. And there may very well be a repetition of that. So these are some of the very real and practical issues that we in CARICOM have to be thinking about and anticipating what might come and therefore being prepared for what might come, working out what our response should be beforehand.
All right, and a very quick final question for you when we talk about that cohesion that we like to see across the region. We know that the U.S. has also taken a very hard line with Venezuela. For example, in the last Trump presidency, back in 2009, we saw President Trump inviting some Caribbean leaders and not others. I believe there were 5 or so Caribbean leaders to Mar-a-Lago for a special meeting with him and leaving others behind. Do you see that there could be a reversal of what we've been able to accomplish as a Caribbean in terms of our leadership being a cohesive unit through CARICOM?
Well, I hope that the leaders of CARICOM have learned since that experience. And when we had the Summit of the Americas, the 9th Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles, I think in 2022 or 2023, I can't quite remember now which year, but we, the CARICOM leaders, collectively insisted that President Biden had to meet with them. Initially, it was being proposed that the Vice President would meet with them, and they said, no. We need to have a meeting with the President. And they took that collective decision, and there was a meeting with the President. All of them, not some of them, all of them, in fact, with both the President and with Vice President Kamala Harris. So that, presumably we have learned from that we don't permit anybody, that we are family, and we don't permit anybody from outside the family to divide the family, because the real source of our strength is our unity, right? The United States is, in a sense, a continent posing as a country, you know, but so that means it only has one, because it is one country, all those 52 states, it's one country, it has one vote in multilateral fora. We, on the other hand, our strength is that even though we are small, we have 14 votes at the UN, at the OAS, etc. So our strength is in our unity, and we must preserve that unity at all costs.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Definitely some great insight into what we can anticipate, and we certainly will stay on top of what's happening as we look toward that final move to the office in January, or the start in January. So thank you again for sharing with us. You can listen up for the Ambassador back here next Tuesday, hopefully to continue our conversations on CARICOM.
Morning, morning, morning. Good morning. Good morning to you.